First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. That is a quote from Martin Niemöller, a man who lived through World War II and was compliant in the early stages of Nazism and lived to regret it. This quote should serve as a warning to everyone. Right now, we see an increase in anti-trans laws and bills being pushed more and more every day. And yet, people stand idly by. Those who are unaffected do nothing. As many of you know from studying the rise of Nazi Germany and fascism in schools, fascism relies on the scapegoating of groups who are often not as privileged as the majority. In Nazi Germany, Jews and homosexuals were deemed as enemies of the state and therefore were subjected to brutal persecution. Right now, the anti-trans laws we are seeing seek to demonize transgender individuals in the eyes of the general public, as well as remove their rights. And these bills seek to justify that. They seek to justify the denial of basic dignity and the denial of human rights. I am a transgender man, and my day-to-day life is a struggle. From waking up in the morning and seeing my body in the mirror, or looking down as I shower and feeling shame and disgust as what I look at. This feeling that I experience and many others also experience, many people think is a mental illness or me simply being jealous of other men. But what I experience is a medical condition that has been around since humans have had a society, a thing called gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria can be so crippling that a study in 2015 by UCLA found that 81.7% of transgender adults had seriously considered suicide in their lifetimes, and 40.4% had attempted suicide. This combined with the discrimination and violence we face on a day-to-day basis, both physically and verbally, as well as the challenges faced in workplace and medical facilities, piles up to make you feel like there is no way for you to keep living. This experience that I and everybody else who is transgender feel is incredibly crippling, and yet we do not see people here to support us. Adults have to deal with this as much as transgender youth, but me, as a transgender youth, I do not have the autonomy and power that other adults have. Right now, in the United States, as we see this increase in anti-trans bills, we are unable to do what we are supposed to do. Transitioning, which does not mean go out and get all the surgeries, is the #1 treatment for transgender people. This means that you will live life in the gender that you feel most comfortable in. But with these laws, this is unable to happen. Bill SB 16 by Utah states, quote, medical providers are prohibited from providing a medical hormonal transgender treatment to medical patients who are not diagnosed with gender dysphoria before a certain date. Those who are diagnosed with this condition are prohibited from receiving the care that they require. Similarly, Bill 1100 by Idaho states requiring students to share restrooms and changing facilities with members of the opposite biological sex generates potential embarrassment, shame, and psychological injury, as well as increasing the likelihood of sexual harassment, molestation, rape, voyeurism, and exhibitionism. These laws are often made with transgender women in mind. For those of you who do not know what a transgender woman is, that means somebody who is assigned male at birth but lives their life as a female. Since these bills are made with transgender women in mind, they fail to take into account people like me. I admit that I am on the more feminine side of things, but if I was put into a changing room with women, they do not want me there. They do not feel comfortable with me there. And if you take an example of a transgender man who is far more masculine than me, they will not want the transgender men in there. These bills seek to bring these transgender people out of these situations by claiming that they are helping the cisgender students. For those of you who do not know what cisgender means, it means you identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. But they are creating a greater issue. It says in the bill that requiring students to be in the same changing rooms will generate potential shame, embarrassment, and psychological injury for those cisgender students. But it fails to take into account the transgender students like me. I have been told to use the changing room with women, and the shame that I feel is so crushing that I cannot find words to describe it. That despite everything I have fought for and every challenge I have faced to get to the moment where I am right now, I am reduced to my sex, that everything I have fought for has been for nothing. Since these bills say this kind of stuff, they're seeking to demonize us transgender people as creating us as this fake enemy that is not there. If school administrators and politicians truly did care about the children in schools, we would see them putting resources into providing education from a young age on what is appropriate behavior and what not to do. And we would also see them putting resources into helping students who have experienced sexual assault and rape. In 2012, a study from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention found that 1 in 8 women in high school had been raped, and yet we do not see these lawmakers pushing to help those students. We see them taking the blame and putting it on a fake enemy. These bills that we are seeing will not reduce the numbers of harassment and sexual assault and rape in schools because the idea of the trans youth being the perpetrators is completely made up. Many people are under the impression that transgender people transition and go through the social ostracization, potential harm, and hundreds of dollars in medical fees to take hormones or take surgeries just for the hope of being in restrooms and changing rooms with members of the opposite biological sex to perform acts of voyeurism or other things. But this is not true. Where does this idea come from that I am here to hurt others and that my whole existence is inappropriate? I believe the main stem of the issue is a lack of education. If we were simply introduced to gay and trans people from a young age, we would see them as normal and not something foreign or new. Oftentimes when people are introduced to something new, they jump to fear immediately before taking the time to consider and understand what is going on. LGBT people have always been in history, as long as we have had society, and will continue to be here until humans are gone. In the animal kingdom, we see plants and animals that exist outside of the male-female binary, and we see gay mating pairs in everything from dragonflies to penguins, and yet we do not learn about this in school. We learn about the triumphs of the Harlem Renaissance and how important it was for Black history, yet we do not learn about the booming gay liberation that was intertwined with all the society there. We learn about the civil rights movements of the 1960s, yet we never hear about Stonewall Riot, which took place in 1969, the most pivotal and important moment in the continued battle for LGBT rights and equality. We never hear about how important transgender women and third gender people were in ancient societies and in indigenous cultures. We never hear about all the gay couples that were everywhere throughout history, from people as important as Alexander the Great to your average citizens. LGBT history has been intertwined through the cisgender and heterosexual history for as long as we have been alive, and yet we are not taught about it. Religions often play a major part in this, since they deem it as something that is immoral and abnormal. By hearing about these things as being immoral and abnormal, we think it is a choice, and as a choice, it should be prevented and punished, which contradicts from the main message of religion, which is to help and love each other. If we had simply been introduced to LGBT people in history, we would have seen them as normal, and we would be there to protect each other. We would not be fighting against each other, and we would truly be there to love each other like many of the religions hope to bring about. We oftentimes do not see gay people and transgender people to live to be past 40. And this number is incredibly low for transgender people like me. If you look to the 1980s under the Reagan administration, we see the AIDS epidemic. But he did not speak about it publicly. He did not put resources into helping the people. One of the main reasons for this is because those gay people were seen as being punished for their sins, and that epidemic was there to kill them off because they were immoral. If we were simply taught in the 80s that LGBT people were normal and they were included in sex education, this would not have happened. We may have finally been able to see people living to be old enough as some of the people in this audience and being able to look up to them and feel that we have hope, which many people like me do not have. We do not have those role models, and we feel like death is the only option for us. Because of this AIDS epidemic, we have seen a great deal of stigma surrounding sexual intercourse between homosexual partners. But if we started including that in sex education within our current school systems right now, this will not happen again. We have to start teaching about these stories of the people that have died within our schools so that this never happens again and that we can respect them and admit what has happened to us. LGBT history has always been there, and it cannot be separated. By ignoring our problems, you are sentencing us to death, and by ignoring us as people, you are erasing our history and therefore erasing your own. I am the same as you, and I am the same as your siblings, your parents, and everyone else in your life. Do not let my voice be silenced and the voices of other people like me to disappear. Do not let me become another statistic or another corpse to be forgotten. Thank you. Thank you.